Little girl calls sterile millionaire CEO asking for a job for her mum, but she says 2 words and he's left in shock. Give mommy a job, daddy. Before anything else, if this video finds you well, wherever you are, let me know how it made you feel at the end. The mahogany desk gleamed under the afternoon sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 32nd floor. James Richardson, at 32, commanded an empire worth $3 billion from this very office. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly over his athletic frame, and his steel-grey eyes reflected the same precision that had built Richardson Industries from nothing. The phone rang. James glanced at the caller ID. Unknown number. He typically let his assistant handle such calls, but something made him pick up. Richardson Industries, James speaking. A tiny voice, sweet as honey and impossibly small, came through the speaker. Hello, mister. Is this the boss man? James frowned, his pen hovering over quarterly reports. Who is this? I'm Emma. I'm 4 years old and I need to talk to you about something super important. A child. How had a 4-year-old gotten his direct line? Emma, sweetheart, how did you get this number? Mommy has it written on a paper. She cries when she looks at it sometimes. The little voice was matter-of-fact, the way only children could be about heartbreaking things. James felt an odd chill run down his spine. What's your mummy's name? Sarah Mitchell. She's really pretty and makes the best pancakes. But we don't have syrup anymore because we don't have money. The name hit James like a physical blow. Sarah Mitchell. Images flashed through his mind. Silky blonde hair, bright green eyes, a laugh that could light up a room. But that was impossible. That Sarah was from 5 years ago, from a night he'd tried to forget. Emma, he said carefully, why are you calling me? Because Mommy needs a job, and you're really rich. She said you're important and might help people. Will you give Mommy a job, please? She's really good at taking care of people. James's throat tightened. What does your mommy do? She's a nurse, but the hospital said they don't need her anymore. Now she cries in the bathroom so I won't see, but I do see. I don't like when Mommy cries. The innocence in that little voice was breaking something inside James's chest. Emma, is your daddy around? There was a pause. When Emma spoke again, her voice was smaller. I don't have a daddy. Mommy says he had to go away before I was born. But you know what? What's that, sweetheart? I think you might be my daddy. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. James felt the world tilt beneath him. Emma, why would you think that? Because Mommy has a picture of you in her special box, and when I asked her who you were, she cried and said you were someone very important who couldn't be in our lives, but I think daddies should take care of their little girls. Don't you? James's hand trembled as he gripped the phone. This couldn't be happening. The doctors had been clear. He was sterile, had been since his teens due to a severe infection. Children were impossible for him, but that voice, so innocent and hopeful, was asking him to be something he'd never thought possible. 20 minutes later, James sat in his car outside Sarah Mitchell's apartment building in Queens. The drive from Manhattan had been a blur of impossible thoughts and racing memories. He'd found her address through his private investigator, something he'd never thought he'd need to do. The building was old but well-maintained, with brick walls and fire escapes zigzagging down the sides. This wasn't the kind of place he usually visited, but something about the child's voice had pulled him here like a magnet. He climbed to the 3rd floor, his expensive shoes echoing in the narrow hallway. Apartment 3B. His hand hesitated before knocking. The door opened to reveal a woman who took his breath away, just as she had 5 years ago. Sarah Mitchell stood there in faded jeans and a simple blue sweater, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was thinner than he remembered, with dark circles under those stunning green eyes, but she was unmistakably the woman who had haunted his dreams. James. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, Sarah." They stared at each other for a long moment, years of silence stretching between them. Then a small figure appeared behind Sarah's legs, a little girl with honey-blonde curls and bright green eyes that were unmistakably Sarah's. But the shape of her face, the set of her chin, those features made James's chest tighten with recognition. "That's him, Mommy!" Emma exclaimed, pointing at James with excitement. "That's the man in your picture. I told you he would come." Sarah's face went pale. "Emma, go to your room, please." "But, Mommy—" "Now, Emma." The little girl's face fell, but she obeyed, glancing back at James with curious eyes before disappearing down the hallway. Sarah stepped aside, allowing James to enter the small apartment. It was clean but sparse, with furniture that had seen better days and walls decorated with Emma's colourful drawings. The contrast to his penthouse was stark. "How did you find us?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with emotion. "Your daughter called me." James turned to face her, studying her reaction. "She called my direct line, Sarah. How does a 4-year-old have my private number?" Sarah's eyes closed as if in pain. "I never thought. I kept that card, but I never imagined she'd." "What card?" Sarah disappeared into a bedroom and returned with a worn business card, his business card from 5 years ago. Her fingers trembled as she held it. "She's mine, isn't she?" The words came out raw, unfiltered. Sarah's silence was answer enough. "That's impossible," James said, more to himself than to her. "The doctors said, doctors can be wrong." Sarah's voice was steady now, resigned. "I found out I was pregnant 2 months after that night. By then, you'd made it clear you weren't interested in anything serious." James ran a hand through his dark hair, memories flooding back. The charity gala, the dance, the way Sarah had looked at him like he was someone worth believing in. The night they'd spent talking until dawn, sharing dreams and fears. And then his panic the next morning, his retreat into the safety of his controlled world. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd already decided we were a mistake." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He had run. When Sarah had tried to call him a few weeks later, he'd had his assistant take messages he never returned. He'd convinced himself it was for the best. He wasn't the settling down type. And she deserved better than someone who could never give her children. Except now, standing in this small apartment, looking at drawings that might be from his daughter, everything he'd believed about himself was crumbling. "I want a DNA test." Sarah nodded. "I figured you would." From down the hallway came the sound of Emma singing softly to herself, a melody that somehow managed to be both heartbreaking and beautiful. James found himself taking a step toward the sound before catching himself. "She's extraordinary," he said quietly. "She is." Sarah's voice was full of fierce pride and protective love. "She's also hungry half the time because I can't find steady work, and she's starting to ask questions I don't know how to answer." James looked around the apartment again, noticing things he'd missed before. The empty space where a television might go, the stack of bills on the counter, the jar of coins by the door. "The job," he said suddenly. "She called to ask for a job for you. I never asked her to do that. But you do need work." Sarah lifted her chin, that stubborn pride he remembered shining in her eyes. "I can take care of my daughter. Our daughter." The words hung between them, full of possibility and pain. From her room, Emma's voice drifted out again, singing about princes and castles and happy endings. The next morning, James found himself in the most expensive coffee shop in Manhattan, sitting across from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the best family lawyer money could buy. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. "Let me understand this correctly, Doctor," Walsh said, her manicured fingers steepled before her. "You've just discovered you may have a 4-year-old daughter you never knew existed, with a woman you haven't spoken to in 5 years. That's correct. And you want to know your legal options regarding custody and support." James shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. "I want to know everything. What my rights are, what my responsibilities are. If Emma is my daughter, I want to be in her life." Dr. Walsh made notes on her yellow legal pad. "Have you considered that the mother might not want you involved? She's managed alone for 4 years. Some women prefer it that way." The thought had kept James awake all night. "She needs help. They both do." "Mr. Richardson, I have to ask, what's your motivation here? Guilt? A sudden desire for fatherhood? Or are you concerned about how this might look if it becomes public?" James was quiet for a long moment, thinking of Emma's voice on the phone, so innocent and hopeful. "I've spent my entire adult life believing I could never have children. If Emma is mine, she's a miracle I never thought possible. I can't walk away from that." "And the mother? Sarah Mitchell?" James's jaw tightened. "What about her? Are you prepared to deal with the complicated emotions that come with co-parenting with someone you have history with?" Before James could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message. The number was Sarah's. He'd gotten it from his investigator the night before. "Emma keeps asking when you're coming back. She's drawn you a picture." Attached was a photo of a child's drawing. Stick figures under a rainbow. A tall figure in a dark suit. A woman with long yellow hair, and a small figure in the middle holding both their hands. At the bottom, in shaky 4-year-old handwriting, "My family." James stared at the image, something breaking and healing simultaneously in his chest. "Mr. Richardson?" Dr. Walsh's voice seemed to come from far away. "I need to go," James said, standing abruptly. "Schedule the DNA test for this afternoon and draft papers for a trust fund. 5 million to start." "Sir, I'd strongly advise—" But James was already walking out, his mind consumed with the image of that simple drawing and the profound weight of those 2 small words, "My family." An hour later, he stood outside Emma's preschool, watching through the chain-link fence as she played on the swings. She was smaller than the other children, her clothes clearly hand-me-downs, but her laughter rang out bright and clear. "She's beautiful." James turned to find Sarah beside him, her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a long shift. "I got your text," he said. "I shouldn't have sent it. She's never had a father figure before. She's gotten attached very quickly." They watched as Emma spotted them and ran to the fence, her face lighting up with joy. "Daddy!" she called out, and James felt his heart stop. "Did you come to take me home?" Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Emma, what did we talk about?" But Emma was already chattering excitedly. "I told my teacher that my daddy came to visit. She said that was wonderful. Are you going to live with us now? Can we get a puppy?" James knelt down to Emma's level, his throat tight with emotion. "Hi, sweetheart, I came to see you. I drew you a picture. Mommy has it at home. It's us being a family." Over Emma's head, James met Sarah's eyes. The pain there was unmistakable, but so was something else. Hope, carefully guarded but present. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "remember what we talked about. Mr. James is a very busy man. He might not be able to visit very often, but he's my daddy." Emma said, with the absolute certainty only a child could possess, "Daddies always come back." James felt something crack open inside his chest. Looking at this little girl, so full of trust and love, he realized that everything he'd thought he knew about himself was wrong. He wasn't just a businessman or a billionaire or a man too damaged for family. He was Emma's father, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly who he was meant to be. That evening, James sat in his study, staring at the DNA test kit on his mahogany desk. The simple cotton swabs seemed to mock him with their significance. In 24 to 48 hours, He would know for certain whether Emma was his daughter, but deep down he already knew the truth. His mind drifted back 5 years to the night that had changed everything. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala had been just another obligation, another chance to write a check and network with other wealthy donors. He'd been going through the motions, making polite conversation when he'd seen her. Sarah had been volunteering that night, helping coordinate the silent auction. She'd worn a simple black dress that probably cost less than his tie, but she'd outshone every socialite in the room. When their eyes met across the ballroom, something electric had passed between them. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she'd said, approaching him with a warm smile that made his carefully constructed walls tremble. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way." She gestured toward the glittering crowd. All these people talking about helping children. But how many have actually spent time with the kids in the hospital upstairs? That question had led to an hour-long conversation. Then to him convincing her to leave the gala with him. They'd driven to an all-night diner in Queens, where she'd told him stories about her patients, the brave little fighters who faced each day with more courage than most adults could muster. "Why nursing?" he'd asked, genuinely curious. "Because when I was 8, my little brother got leukemia. The nurses at the hospital, they weren't just taking care of his body. They were keeping our whole family together. They gave us hope when we had none left." "Did he make it?" Sarah's face had clouded. "No, but those nurses taught me that even when you can't save someone, you can still love them well. That's what I want to do with my life." James had been captivated. Here was a woman who chose a difficult profession not for money or prestige, but because she wanted to heal people. It was so different from his world of mergers and acquisitions, of profit margins and market shares. They'd talked until sunrise, sharing dreams and fears, with the kind of openness James had never experienced. When he'd driven her home that morning, he'd kissed her on the doorstep of her apartment building, the same building where he'd found her yesterday. For 3 weeks after that, they'd been inseparable. James had found himself cancelling meetings to spend time with Sarah, bringing her coffee during her long shifts, listening to her stories about her patients. She'd made him want to be a better man. But then reality had crashed in. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "She's a nurse, James. A nice enough girl, I'm sure, but you need to think about your future. The company needs an heir who understands our world." The pressure had been relentless. Board members making pointed comments about appropriate matches, society columnists speculating about his romantic life, and underneath it all, his own fears. What did he know about love? About being the kind of man someone like Sarah deserved? So he'd run. He'd convinced himself it was for her own good, that she'd be better off without the complications his world would bring. When she'd called, he'd hidden behind his assistant. When she'd stopped calling, he'd told himself he'd made the right choice. Now, looking at the DNA test kit, James realized how catastrophically wrong he'd been. His phone rang, jolting him from his memories. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Hello? James, I'm sorry to bother you, but Emma, she's asking for you. She won't go to sleep until I call." There was exhaustion in Sarah's voice, and something else, vulnerability she was trying to hide. "Put her on." A moment later, Emma's sweet voice filled the line. "Daddy? Are you coming to read me a story?" The word daddy hit him like a punch to the chest every time. "I can't tonight, sweetheart, but maybe tomorrow." "Promise?" James closed his eyes. "I promise." "Okay, Mommy says you have to work lots because you're important. But you know what?" "What's that?" "I think being my daddy is the most important job ever." When Sarah came back on the line, there were tears in her voice. "She's never had anyone to read to her except me, the way she looks at you. James, I need you to understand something. If you're going to be in her life, you have to really be in it. I won't let her get hurt." "I understand." Do you? Because Emma has already built this whole fantasy around you. In her mind, you're the daddy who's going to make everything better. If you disappear again, I won't disappear. There was a long pause. You did before. The accusation hung between them, heavy with 5 years of hurt and regret. I was a coward, James said quietly. I was scared of what you made me feel, scared of changing my life, but I'm not that man anymore. People don't change that much, James. Don't they? 5 years ago, I thought I'd never have children. Now I might have a daughter who thinks I hung the moon. If that doesn't change a man, what does? After he hung up, James sat in the growing darkness, thinking about choices and consequences, about the moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself crumbles away. Tomorrow, he would get the DNA results. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, James Richardson allowed himself to hope. The laboratory's waiting room felt sterile and cold. Nothing like the warm chaos of Emma's preschool, where James had spent the morning. He'd volunteered to pick her up, ostensibly to give Sarah time to rest between her double shifts. But really, because he couldn't stay away. Watching Emma play with the other children had been a revelation. She was shy at first, hanging back while the others ran around, but when a smaller boy had fallen and scraped his knee, Emma had immediately rushed to help him. "It's okay, Tommy," she'd said, her little hand patting his back. "Mommy says hurts go away faster when someone cares about you." The teachers had exchanged knowing looks. "She's going to be a caretaker like her mother," one had whispered to James, always looking out for everyone else. Now, sitting in the lab waiting for results that would change everything, James couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Emma had Sarah's compassion, her instinct to heal and comfort. But she also had something else, a fierce determination in the set of her chin that reminded James of himself. Dr. Patricia Reeves emerged from the back office, her expression professionally neutral. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and she'd handled the testing with sensitivity to the unusual situation. "Mr. Richardson, the results are ready." James's throat felt dry. "And?" Dr. Reeves smiled, the first real emotion she'd shown. "Congratulations, you're definitely Emma's father. The probability is 99.97%. The words hit James like a physical force. He'd known somehow, but hearing it confirmed made everything real in a way that stole his breath. "Are you all right?" Dr. Reeves asked. James nodded, though he felt anything but all right. He felt transformed, like every cell in his body had shifted to accommodate this new reality. He had a daughter. Emma was his. The drive to Sarah's apartment passed in a blur. He found them in the small kitchen. Emma standing on a chair beside Sarah as they made what appeared to be peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. "Daddy!" Emma squealed when she saw him, jumping down from the chair to run into his arms. The impact of her small body against his legs, the absolute trust in the way she hugged him, nearly brought James to his knees. Sarah turned from the counter, her face anxious. "You have the results." James nodded, lifting Emma into his arms. She felt impossibly light, impossibly precious. "Well," Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "She's mine." The words came out rough with emotion. "Emma is my daughter." Sarah's face crumpled with relief and something else. Fear. Maybe. Or grief for the secret she'd carried alone for so long. "I knew it," Emma declared, throwing her arms around James's neck. "I told you. I told everyone at school my daddy would come find me." Over Emma's head, James met Sarah's eyes. There was so much to say, so much to figure out, but first there was this moment, holding his daughter. Understanding finally that some miracles did happen. "Are you hungry, Daddy?" Emma asked. "We're having sandwich dinner because Mommy's tired from working all night at the hospital." James looked at the meager meal preparation, at Sarah's exhausted face, at the stack of bills on the counter that seemed to mock him with their insistence. "Actually," he said carefully, "I was hoping you both might come have dinner with me tonight, somewhere special." Emma's eyes widened. "Like a restaurant, with fancy napkins." "The fanciest," James promised. Sarah started to shake her head. "James, we can't." "Please," he said quietly. "Let me do this. Let me be her father." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with promise and possibility and 5 years of missed time that could never be recovered. Sarah looked at Emma's eager face, then back at James. "Okay," she said finally, "but somewhere child-friendly. Emma's not used to. I know exactly the place." 2 hours later, they sat in a family restaurant in Midtown that James had hastily researched. It was nothing like the places he usually frequented, no crystal chandeliers or celebrity chefs, but Emma was enchanted by the crayons and paper placemats. "Look, Daddy," she said, showing him her drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's our family." James studied the picture, noting how Emma had drawn him taller than everyone else, how she'd given Sarah a big smile, how she'd positioned herself right in the middle. "It's perfect," he said, and meant it. As they ate, Emma chattering excitedly about everything from her favorite color, purple, to her best friend at school, a boy named Marcus who shared his cookies, James found himself cataloging every detail. The way she wrinkled her nose when she laughed, how she cut her chicken nuggets into perfect little squares, the unconscious way she leaned against Sarah when she got tired. 4 years of moments he'd missed, 4 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and Christmas mornings. The loss hit him suddenly, sharply, leaving him breathless. "James?" Sarah's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you okay?" He looked at her across the table. This woman who had carried the weight of single motherhood alone, who had given Emma all the love 2 parents should have provided. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for running away, for not being here, for all the time we've lost." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "We can't change the past." "No," James agreed, reaching across the table to touch Emma's hand as she colored, "but we can change everything else." Emma looked up at him with those bright green eyes that were exactly like her mother's. "Daddy, are you going to live with us now?" The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded with implications that would reshape all their lives. James looked at Sarah, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her face. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart," he said finally. "But I promise you this, I'm not going anywhere ever again." Emma smiled, returning to her coloring, as if that settled everything. But James caught the look of doubt that flashed across Sarah's face, and he realized that earning Emma's trust was only half the battle. The other half would be proving to Sarah that this time he wouldn't run. 3 days later, James stood in his office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. His mind consumed with thoughts of custody arrangements and trust funds, and the future he was trying to build with a daughter he'd known for less than a week. His assistant, Margaret, knocked on the door. "Sir, your 11 o'clock is here." "Send them in." But instead of his scheduled appointment, Sarah walked into his office, and James felt his world tilt once again. She wore a simple grey dress and carried herself with the quiet dignity he remembered, but there was something different in her bearing, a determination that made him wary. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Of course, please sit down." Sarah remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her. "I've been thinking about what happens next, about what's best for Emma." James felt a chill run down his spine. "Sarah, you want to be her father. I understand that. But Emma needs stability, not someone who's going to drift in and out of her life when it's convenient. I told you, I'm not going anywhere. And you told me that 5 years ago, too." The accusation hung between them, sharp as a blade. James stepped closer, noting the way Sarah tensed slightly. That was different. Was it? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like the same pattern. You've decided you want something, so you're pursuing it with single-minded determination. But what happens when the novelty wears off, when being a father becomes complicated and messy and interferes with your business empire? James felt anger flare, then forced it down. She had every right to be cautious. What do you want from me, Sarah? I want guarantees, legal ones. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila folder. I've been to see a lawyer. I want a custody agreement that protects Emma. Scheduled visitation, financial support, but clear boundaries. James took the folder, his jaw tightening as he scanned the documents. This is very formal. Emma's not a business deal, James. She's a little girl who deserves better than uncertainty. You're trying to limit my access to my own daughter. Sarah's eyes flashed. I'm trying to protect her from getting her heart broken when you decide this whole father thing is too complicated. The words hit James like physical blows. He set the folder down carefully, trying to control his temper. You really think that little of me? I think you're a man who's used to getting what he wants, when he wants it. But children aren't acquisitions, James. They're people with feelings and needs that don't always align with your schedule. Before James could respond, his phone rang. Emma's preschool appeared on the caller ID. Mr. Richardson, the voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, Emma's teacher. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been an incident with Emma. James felt his blood turn to ice. What kind of incident? She's fine physically, but she got into an altercation with another child. She's very upset and asking for her daddy. Would you be able to come? I'll be right there. James hung up and looked at Sarah, who had gone pale. Emma's school. She's upset about something. I'll drive. They made the trip to Queens in tense silence, both lost in their own worries. At the school, Mrs. Chen met them in the hallway, her usually calm demeanor showing signs of strain. What happened? Sarah asked immediately. Emma got into a fight with Marcus, her friend. He was teasing another child about not having a father, and Emma, well, she became very protective. She pushed Marcus and told him that having a daddy was the best thing ever, and that some kids' daddies just had to work very hard to find them. James felt something twist in his chest. Where is she now? Sarah asked. In my office. She's been crying for the past 20 minutes, asking for her daddy. They found Emma curled up in a child-sized chair, her face streaked with tears. When she saw James, she launched herself into his arms. Daddy, I was so scared you wouldn't come. I'll always come when you need me, sweetheart, James said, holding her tight. Always. Marcus said, kids without daddies are broken. But I told him I'm not broken because my daddy loves me. Right, Daddy? You love me? James felt his throat close up. Over Emma's head, he met Sarah's eyes and saw his own anguish reflected there. More than anything in the world, he whispered. Emma pulled back to look at him, her green eyes serious. Marcus said his daddy takes him camping and teaches him to play baseball. Will you do those things with me? Every single one. Promise? I promise. Emma smiled then, the storm passing as quickly as it had come. Can we go get ice cream? I was very brave today. As they walked to the car, Emma chattering happily between them, James caught Sarah's arm. The custody agreement, he said quietly. Tear it up. Sarah looked at him in surprise. James, I don't want scheduled visitation or formal arrangements. I want to be Emma's father, really be her father. That means being there for playground fights and scraped knees and bad dreams. It means putting her first, even when it's inconvenient. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. And what about us? What about all the complications between you and me? Then we figure it out, together, for her. Emma tugged on both their hands. Are you coming for ice cream too, Mommy? Sarah looked down at their daughter, and then back at James. "Yes, baby, we're all going together." As they walked toward the ice cream shop, Emma between them chattering about sprinkles and whether chocolate or vanilla was better, James realized this was what he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. Not success or wealth or power, but this, the weight of a small hand in his, the trust of a child who believed he could make everything better, and the tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be fixed. Maybe even love could get a second chance. 2 weeks after the ice cream incident, James found himself in uncharted territory, the toy aisle at Target. Emma had specifically requested a daddy shopping trip, and he'd been powerless to refuse those bright green eyes. "This one, Daddy." Emma held up a stuffed unicorn almost as big as she was. "Her name is Sparkles, and she needs a home." James looked at the price tag, $12. Such a small amount, yet it represented something enormous to him. His first real purchase as a father, chosen entirely to make his daughter smile. "Then Sparkles definitely needs to come home with us." Emma beamed and hugged the unicorn tight. "Mommy says we can only buy things we really need, but you said this was a special Daddy Day." The innocent words hit James harder than he expected. How many times had Sarah had to say no to things Emma wanted? How many small disappointments had his absence caused? "Emma, sweetheart, would you like to pick out some new clothes too, and maybe some books?" "Really? Can I pick anything?" "Anything you want?" An hour later, their cart was overflowing with clothes, toys, books, and art supplies. Emma chatted excitedly about each item, but James noticed she kept looking around nervously. "What's wrong, baby? Is Mummy going to be mad? She says money is tight and we shouldn't want too much." James knelt down to Emma's level in the middle of the store aisle. "Your mommy won't be mad. And Emma, you never have to worry about money again. Daddy has enough for everything you need, even for Mommy, so she doesn't have to work so much." The question broke something open in James's chest. Even for Mommy? When they arrived at the apartment with bags of purchases, Sarah was waiting with a mixture of gratitude and concern in her eyes. "James, this is too much," she said, watching Emma excitedly show off her new things. "It's not enough," James replied quietly. "It's not even close to enough." That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by her new treasures, James and Sarah sat in the small living room. The financial conversation they'd been avoiding hung between them like a loaded weapon. "I want to help," James said finally, "not just with Emma, but with everything. The rent, the bills, whatever you need." Sarah's back straightened defensively. "I can provide for my daughter. Our daughter. And I know you can. But you shouldn't have to do it alone anymore. James, I won't be some kept woman. That's not what this is about." James leaned forward, frustration creeping into his voice. "This is about Emma not having to worry about whether there's enough money for food. About you not working double shifts and coming home exhausted." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "What are you proposing? Move in with me?" The words surprised them both. James hadn't planned to say it, but suddenly it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "That's impossible," Sarah said immediately. "Why?" Because we're not a couple, James. We're two people trying to figure out how to co-parent. Living together would complicate everything. Everything's already complicated." Sarah stood up, pacing to the window. "Emma's getting too attached. She's starting to build fantasies about us being a real family. If we live together, and then it doesn't work out. What if it does work out?" Sarah turned to stare at him. "What are you saying?" James stood too, crossing to her. "I'm saying that maybe Emma's not the only one who's gotten attached. I'm saying that 5 years ago I was too scared to fight for what we had. But I'm not scared anymore." "James, I love her, Sarah. I love Emma more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. But I also," He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Also what? I also still love you. The confession hung in the air between them, electric and dangerous. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You don't get to say that, she whispered. Not now, not after everything. Why not? Because I spent 2 years getting over you, 2 years convincing myself that what we had wasn't real, that you were just playing with me. It was real. It was the most real thing in my life. Sarah laughed bitterly. Then why did you run? Because I was a coward, because I was terrified of needing someone the way I needed you, because I'd never felt anything that strong before, and it scared the hell out of me. They stood there facing each other, 5 years of hurt and longing crackling between them like electricity. This isn't about us, Sarah said finally. This is about Emma. Is it? Because Emma wants a family, Sarah, a real family. And maybe she's smarter than both of us. Before Sarah could respond, Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom. Mommy, Daddy, I had a bad dream. They found her sitting up in bed, clutching Sparkles the unicorn, tears streaming down her face. What was the dream about, baby? Sarah asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. You and Daddy were fighting, and then Daddy went away forever. I tried to call him like before, but he wouldn't come back. James felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Emma, sweetheart, I promised you I wouldn't go away. But in my dream, you said promises don't count when grown-ups are mad at each other. Sarah and James exchanged a look over Emma's head. Even at 4 years old, their daughter was picking up on the tension between them. Emma, James said, settling on her other side, sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, but that doesn't change how much we love you. Do you love Mommy too? The question hung in the air, innocent and loaded with hope. James looked at Sarah, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Yes, he said quietly, I do love Mommy. Emma smiled through her tears. Then why don't we all live together like real families do? And there it was, the question that would change everything, asked by a 4-year-old who saw the world in simple terms of love and belonging. Sarah tucked Emma back into bed, but James could see the wheels turning in her mind. The conversation was far from over. The custody mediation office in downtown Manhattan felt like neutral territory, which was exactly what Sarah had wanted. She sat across from James at a polished conference table, their lawyers flanking them like generals preparing for war. But this wasn't supposed to be a war. This was supposed to be about Emma. Mrs. Mitchell, the mediator, Dr. Sandra Lopez, said gently, You've indicated you want to establish formal custody arrangements. Can you tell us why? Sarah glanced at James, noting the tension in his jaw. I want clear boundaries, scheduled visits, defined responsibilities. Structure that protects Emma's emotional well-being. And Mr. Richardson, you've objected to formal scheduling. James leaned forward. I don't want to be a weekend father. I want to be involved in Emma's daily life, helping with homework, attending school events, being there when she needs me. The problem, Sarah's lawyer interjected, is that Mr. Richardson has a demanding career that requires extensive travel. We need guarantees that Emma won't be disappointed by broken promises. James's lawyer, Dr. Walsh, shuffled through papers. My client is prepared to restructure his business commitments to prioritize his parental responsibilities. Easy to say, Sarah said quietly. Harder to do when a $3 billion company depends on you. Dr. Lopez made notes on her pad. Let's talk about living arrangements. Mrs. Mitchell, you've indicated you want Emma to remain in your current apartment. It's her home. She's settled there, has friends in the neighborhood. Mr. Richardson, you've suggested alternative arrangements. James looked directly at Sarah. I've suggested they both move in with me. Emma would have her own room, access to better schools, resources she doesn't currently have. In exchange for what? Sarah asked. unable to keep the edge from her voice. "In exchange for nothing. Because she's my daughter, and she deserves the best life I can give her." Dr. Lopez raised a hand to prevent Sarah's response. "Mrs. Mitchell, what concerns do you have about this arrangement?" Sarah took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that had been swirling for days. "Mr. Richardson lives in a different world. Doormen and elevators and people who clean your house. Emma doesn't understand that world." "She could learn," James said. "But should she have to? Should a 4-year-old have to adapt to a lifestyle that's completely foreign to everything she's known?" "You mean, should she have to adapt to a lifestyle where she doesn't have to worry about money, where she can have books and toys and opportunities?" The words hung in the air, sharp with accusation. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? I'm not criticizing you, Sarah. You've done an incredible job raising Emma alone, but you don't have to do it alone anymore." Dr. Lopez intervened again. "Let's take a step back. Mr. Richardson, aside from financial advantages, what do you believe you can offer Emma?" James was quiet for a moment. "Stability. A father who puts her first. Someone who will be there for every milestone, every disappointment, every moment she needs support. And you don't believe you can provide that from separate households. I believe Emma deserves parents who work together, not against each other." Sarah's lawyer leaned forward. "My client isn't working against anyone. She's protecting her daughter from unrealistic expectations." "What's unrealistic about wanting to be a family?" James asked. The question silenced the room. Dr. Lopez made more notes, then looked up at both of them. "I'd like to suggest something unconventional. Instead of formal custody arrangements right now, what if we tried a trial period? 30 days where you experiment with different arrangements and see what works best for Emma." Sarah felt panic flutter in her chest. "What kind of arrangements?" "May split time between both homes. See how Emma adjusts to Mr. Richardson's apartment. Observe how she responds to different routines. Let her needs guide the decision." James nodded immediately. "I think that's perfect." Sarah looked at her lawyer, who shrugged. "It's not legally binding. If it doesn't work, we proceed with formal arrangements." "Ooh, and if it does work?" Sarah asked. Dr. Lopez smiled. "Then you'll have figured out what's best for Emma without a judge having to decide for you." 2 hours later, Sarah and James walked out of the building together, the weight of the trial period heavy between them. 30 days, Sarah said. 30 days, James agreed. "James, I need you to understand something. If this doesn't work, if Emma gets hurt because we couldn't figure out how to make this work, she won't get hurt. I won't let that happen." Sarah stopped walking, forcing James to turn and face her. "You can't control everything. That's what scares me about this whole situation. You're used to buying solutions, fixing problems with money and power, but families don't work that way. Then teach me how they do work." The simple request caught Sarah off guard. "What?" "I don't know how to be a father, Sarah. I don't know how to be part of a family, but I want to learn. Will you teach me?" Standing there on the steps of the mediation building, with the noise of Manhattan traffic around them and 30 days stretching ahead like an uncertain bridge, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Maybe James was right. Maybe Emma was smarter than both of them. Maybe it was time to find out if broken things really could be fixed. "Okay," she said quietly, "but we do this for Emma, not for us." James nodded, though something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced the two could be separated. "For Emma," he agreed. But as they walked toward their separate cars, both were thinking the same thing. 30 days could change everything. The question was whether they were brave enough to let it. Day 15 of the trial period, and James was learning that fatherhood came with surprises he'd never anticipated, like the fact that Emma had a meltdown every morning when it was time to brush her teeth, or that she could turn getting dressed into a 2-hour negotiation. "I want to wear my princess dress to school," Emma announced, standing in the middle of his guest room, now Emma's room, wearing nothing but underwear and a determined expression. "Sweetheart, it's Tuesday. Princess dresses are for special occasions." "Today is special. It's Tuesday." James looked at the clock, 7:45 a.m. Sarah would be here in 15 minutes to take Emma to school before her morning shift at the hospital. He was supposed to have Emma ready. "How about the blue dress with the flowers?" "No, princess dress or no dress." Emma crossed her arms and glared at him with a stubbornness that reminded him powerfully of himself during board meetings. "Emma, if you don't get dressed, you'll be late for school." "Good, I don't want to go to school." And suddenly Emma was crying, not the frustrated tears of a tantrum, but real, heartbroken sobs that made James's chest ache. He knelt down beside her. "What's wrong, baby?" "Marcus said his daddy is taking him to Disney World for his birthday." And all the other kids started talking about trips with their daddies. And I said my daddy was taking me somewhere special too. "But I don't know if you really will, because you're still new at being a daddy." The words hit James like physical blows. He pulled Emma into his arms, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "Emma, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "I am absolutely going to take you somewhere special. In fact, how about we plan a trip right after your trial month with me is over?" "Really? Somewhere with princesses?" "Somewhere with as many princesses as you want." Emma's tears stopped as quickly as they'd started. "Can Mommy come too?" The question caught James off guard. Would you want her to? "Families go on trips together. That's what Marcus said." Before James could respond, Sarah's knock came at the door. Emma immediately brightened. "Mommy, Daddy said we're going on a trip with princesses." Sarah appeared in the doorway. Taking in the scene, Emma half-dressed and tear-streaked, James still in his business clothes, looking overwhelmed. "What happened here?" "Princess dress crisis," James said wryly, "and apparently I made promises about Disney World." Sarah's expression softened. "Ah, the Tuesday morning meltdown. She does this with me too." "She does?" "Emma, go brush your teeth. We'll figure out the dress situation." Emma scampered off, crisis forgotten. Sarah picked up the blue dress James had suggested. "This one's perfect for school. The princess dress can be for after school." "How did you compromise? She gets to feel special, but she's also appropriately dressed." "Parenting is basically a series of negotiations." James watched as Sarah helped Emma into the blue dress, marveling at the easy rhythm between mother and daughter. "I'm terrible at this," he said quietly. "You're learning. There's a difference." "She asked if you could come on the Disney trip." Sarah paused in brushing Emma's hair. "James, I know we're not there yet. I know we're still figuring things out, but maybe we could think about it." Emma bounded back into the room. "Are we all going to see the princesses?" Sarah looked at James, then at their daughter's hopeful face. "We'll see, baby. First we have to get through these 30 days. "How many more days?" "Mommy?" 15. Emma counted on her fingers. "That's a lot. Will you and Daddy still like each other after 15 more days?" The innocent question hung in the air. James found himself holding his breath, waiting for Sarah's answer. "We'll always care about each other, Emma, because we both love you." It wasn't exactly what Emma or James wanted to hear, but it was honest. That evening, James called his assistant Margaret with an unusual request. "I need you to clear my schedule for the rest of the month." "Sir?" "You have the Morrison merger next week, and the board meeting. Delegate the merger to Davidson." "Move the board meeting to next month. I need to be available." "Available for what?" James looked toward Emma's room, where she was playing with sparkles and singing softly to herself. "For being a father." "Sir, the board won't understand." "Then explain it to them. My daughter is more important than any meeting." After he hung up, James found Emma in her room having a tea party with her stuffed animals. "Daddy, do you want to have tea with us? Sparkles made cookies." James looked at his watch. 8 p.m. He usually worked until at least 10, but Emma was looking at him with such hope, holding a tiny plastic teacup. "I'd love to have tea." He folded his long frame onto the small pink chair Emma pointed to, accepting the imaginary cookie she offered. "This is the best cookie I've ever had," he said seriously. Emma giggled. "It's pretend, Daddy." "The best pretend cookie, then." As they played, James realized something was shifting inside him. The urgent pull of work, the constant need to check his phone, the restless energy that usually drove him, all of it was quieting. For the first time in his adult life, James Richardson was exactly where he wanted to be. Emma yawned as the tea party wound down. "Daddy, will you read me a story?" "Of course." As he tucked her into bed and opened the book she'd chosen, something about a brave little princess who saved her kingdom, Emma reached for his hand. "Daddy, I'm glad you found me." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." But as James read about the princess who had to choose between love and duty, he couldn't help thinking about his own choice. 15 more days to prove he could be the father Emma deserved. 15 more days to convince Sarah that some second chances were worth taking. 15 more days to figure out if love really was enough to build a family. Day 28 of the trial period, and James thought he was finally getting the hang of fatherhood. Emma's morning routine ran smoothly now. Their evening conversations felt natural, and he'd successfully handled 3 minor crises without calling Sarah for backup. Then his father showed up. James. Richard Richardson stood in the doorway of James's penthouse apartment, his silver hair perfectly styled, his $1,000 suit immaculate as always. At 72, he commanded attention the way some men commanded armies. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk." James glanced toward Emma's room, where she was playing quietly. "It's not a good time. It's about the child." The way Richard said "the child," like Emma was a problem to be solved rather than a person, made James's jaw clench. "Her name is Emma, and yes, she's here. Sarah had to pick up an extra shift at the hospital." Richard walked into the living room, his sharp eyes taking in the toys scattered across expensive furniture. The children's books stacked on the coffee table, the small pink backpack hanging by the door. "The board is concerned." "About what?" "About your sudden lifestyle changes. You've missed 3 important meetings this month. The Morrison merger was nearly derailed because you weren't available to handle the final negotiations." James felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the old pressure to prioritize business above everything else. "Davidson handled it fine." "That's not the point. You're the CEO, James. People depend on you." "People depend on me here too." Richard's expression hardened. "A nurse and her child are hardly—" "Don't!" James's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't finish that sentence." They stared at each other across the living room, 30 years of complicated father-son dynamics crackling between them. "James, be practical. You have responsibilities. Richardson Industries employs 12,000 people. The decisions you make affect thousands of families, including mine." "This isn't your family," Richard said bluntly. "This is a woman who kept a child from you for 4 years and now wants financial support." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" "I've had her investigated, James. Sarah Mitchell lost her job 3 months ago due to hospital budget cuts, behind on rent. Credit cards maxed out, and suddenly she allows her daughter to contact the wealthy father she's never mentioned before." James felt cold fury wash over him. "You investigated Sarah. I protected my son from a potential gold digger. Get out." "James, I said get out, now." Richard's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake. This infatuation will pass, And when it does, you'll have damaged everything we've built. We haven't built anything. You built an empire, and you expected me to worship it the way you do. But I'm not you, Dad. No, you're not. You're weak, just like your mother was. The mention of his mother, dead now for 10 years, hit James like a physical blow. My mother was the strongest person I ever knew. Your mother chose love over responsibility and died miserable. My mother died because you put business before family every single day of your marriage. She died lonely because you were never there. Richard's face flushed with anger. Everything I did was for this family. No, it was for your legacy, for your empire. Family was just collateral damage. From behind them came a small voice. Daddy, why are you yelling? James turned to see Emma standing in the hallway, clutching sparkles, her green eyes wide with fear. It's okay, sweetheart, James said immediately, crossing to her. Daddy's friend was just leaving. But Richard wasn't done. Emma, is it? You're a very pretty little girl. Emma hid behind James's legs, peeking out at the intimidating stranger. Emma, Richard continued, his voice artificially gentle, do you know how important your daddy is? How many people need him to do his job? Dad, stop. He has a very big company with lots of workers. Sometimes he has to travel far away for weeks at a time. Would you like that? If Daddy had to go away for work? Emma's grip on James's leg tightened. Daddy promised he wouldn't go away. Sometimes grown-ups have to break promises when their work is very important. Stop it, James said, his voice deadly quiet. But Emma was already crying. Daddy, are you going to go away? Are you going to break your promise? James knelt down, gathering Emma into his arms. No, baby, I'm not going anywhere. I promised you, remember? But the man said, the man is wrong. James looked up at his father, seeing a stranger where once there had been someone he desperately wanted to please. Daddy's most important job is taking care of you. Richard shook his head. You're destroying everything, James. I'm building something better. After Richard left, James spent an hour convincing Emma that he wasn't going to disappear, but her questions kept coming. What if your work says you have to go away? What if you get in trouble for staying with me? When Sarah arrived to pick up Emma, she immediately sensed the tension. What happened? James explained about his father's visit. Watching Sarah's face grow pale, he investigated me. Sarah, whatever he found the truth. I did lose my job. I'm behind on bills. And yes, when Emma called you, part of me hoped. She stopped, shaking her head. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am using Emma to... Stop! James took her hands. You are the most honest person I know. You kept Emma from me because you thought it was best for her, not because you wanted anything from me. But what if he's right about the rest? What if I'm holding you back from your responsibilities? Emma, who had been listening from the couch, suddenly spoke up. Mummy, Daddy said I'm his most important job now. Sarah looked at James, searching his face. Is that true? James thought about his father's words, about the pressure and expectations that had ruled his life for 30 years. Then he looked at Emma, curled up with her unicorn, trusting him completely. Yes, he said quietly. It's true. But even as he said it, James could feel the weight of his father's ultimatum hanging over them. Choose the business or choose the family. He couldn't have both. Day 30. The end of the trial period. James sat in his office, staring at the resignation letter he'd typed, but couldn't bring himself to submit. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its usual energy. But inside the 42nd floor of Richardson Industries, everything felt suspended in time. Margaret knocked and entered. Sir, the board is assembled for the emergency meeting. James nodded, straightening his tie. Tell them I'll be right there. But first, he made a phone call. Sarah? It's me. How did Emma's school presentation go? Sarah's voice was warm but tired. She was amazing. She told the whole class about her family, her mommy the nurse, and her daddy the businessman who comes to all her tea parties. I wish I could have been there. James, about tonight, about the end of the trial period, we should talk. I know, after I handle something here at the office. Everything okay? James looked at the resignation letter on his screen. It will be. The boardroom felt different when James walked in. 12 faces turned toward him, but the atmosphere was colder than usual. His father sat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. "Gentlemen," James began, "I assume you've heard about my personal situation." Board member David Morrison, a man in his 60s with steel-grey hair, leaned forward. "James, we're concerned about your recent absences. The company needs leadership." "The company has leadership. I've been available for every major decision, but not physically present," added another board member, Helen Carter. "Leadership isn't just about making decisions, it's about being here, being visible." Richard spoke for the first time. "James has been distracted by personal matters. As his father and as chairman of this board, I'm concerned about his ability to fulfill his duties." James felt the familiar weight of expectation, the pressure that had shaped his entire adult life. "What exactly are you proposing?" Morrison opened a folder. "A sabbatical, 6 months to sort out your personal life. David Wilson can serve as interim CEO. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to consider whether you're the right person to lead this company long-term." The threat hung in the air, unspoken, but clear. James looked around the table at men and women he'd worked with for years, people he'd considered allies. "I see." James stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "Can I tell you what I've learned in the past 30 days? The board exchanged glances, but remained silent. "I've learned that a 4-year-old's bedtime story is more important than a late-night conference call. I've learned that being there when your child has a nightmare matters more than being available for every crisis. I've learned that love, real love, requires presence, not just financial support." "James," his father said quietly, "you're being naive." James turned back to the room. "Am I? Because from where I stand, you all look like exactly what I used to be, successful, wealthy, and completely empty." "You're out of line," Morrison said. "No, I'm finally in line. For the first time in my life, I know what really matters." James walked back to his chair, but didn't sit down. "I resign." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock around the table. "James," Richard stood up, his face pale, "you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." "You'll regret this," Morrison said, "in 6 months when the novelty wears off, when you realize what you've given up." "What have I given up? A job that consumed my life? The approval of people who only valued me for what I could do for them?" James shook his head. "I'm not giving up anything. I'm finally gaining everything." Richard's voice was quiet, almost pleading. "This is your legacy, James. Your grandfather built this company. I grew it. I was supposed to sacrifice my life for your vision of success. But I have a daughter now who thinks I hung the moon. I have a chance at real love with a woman who sees the man I could be, not just the CEO I am. That's the legacy I want to leave." James headed for the door, then turned back one last time. "Davidson will make an excellent CEO. He actually cares about this company more than he cares about proving himself." "Where will you go?" Helen Carter asked. "What will you do?" James smiled, thinking of Emma's laugh, of Sarah's guarded hope, of the life waiting for him beyond these walls. "I'm going to be a father. And if I'm very lucky, maybe a husband too." He walked out of Richardson Industries for the last time, leaving behind 30 years of expectations and stepping into an uncertain but hopeful future. An hour later, he knocked on Sarah's apartment door. When she opened it, Emma launched herself into his arms. "Daddy, Mummy said it's decision day. Are we going to be a real family now?" James looked over Emma's head at Sarah, seeing the question in her eyes. "Yes, baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be a real family." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "James, what did you do?" "What I should have done 5 years ago. I chose love." Emma squealed with delight, chattering about princesses and trips and all the things they would do together. But James only had eyes for Sarah, for the woman brave enough to give love a second chance. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And as James held his daughter and looked into the eyes of the woman he'd never stopped loving, he realized that some endings were really just beginnings in disguise. 6 months later, James Richardson Mitchell stood in the backyard of their new house in Westchester, watching Emma chase butterflies, while Sarah planted flowers in what would become her herb garden. The morning sun painted everything golden, and for the first time in his adult life, James felt completely at peace. "Daddy, come see," Emma called, pointing to a butterfly that had landed on her outstretched finger. "It's purple, just like my favorite color." James jogged over, marveling, as he always did, at Emma's ability to find magic in ordinary moments. "He's beautiful, sweetheart." "It's a girl butterfly," Emma corrected seriously. "Her name is Princess Buttercup. And she lives in our garden now." Sarah looked up from her planting, dirt on her cheek and happiness shining in her green eyes. "Emma, sweetie, butterflies don't usually stay in one place." "This one will," Emma said with absolute confidence, "because she knows we're a family and families stick together." The butterfly fluttered away. But Emma didn't seem disappointed. She was already distracted by something else, a ladybug climbing up a blade of grass. "How's the consulting business?" Sarah asked, settling back on her heels. James had started Richardson Consulting 3 months ago, helping small businesses develop sustainable growth strategies. It was challenging work, but it allowed him the flexibility to attend every school event, every doctor's appointment, every moment that mattered to his family. "Good, really good. The Peterson account came through yesterday." "That's wonderful," Sarah smiled. "Are you happy?" "Really happy." It was a question she asked periodically, still unable to quite believe that he'd given up everything for them without regret. "Sarah, look at this." James gestured toward their life, the house they'd chosen together, the garden Sarah was creating, Emma playing in the safe haven they'd built around her. "How could I be anything but happy?" Emma ran over, throwing herself into James's arms with the total abandon of a child who had never doubted she was loved. "Daddy, Mommy said we can have a picnic lunch outside today." "That sounds perfect. And tomorrow is Saturday, so you don't have to work and we can go to the park and feed the ducks." "Absolutely." Emma paused, her small face growing serious. "Daddy, do you ever miss your old job, the one with the big building?" It was a question she'd asked before, and James suspected it came from some deep worry that he might regret his choice. "Emma, can I tell you a secret?" She nodded eagerly. "My old job was just about making money. But my job now, being your daddy and taking care of our family, that's about making happiness, and happiness is much more important than money." "Even though money can buy ice cream?" James laughed. "Even though money can buy ice cream." "Good," Emma said, satisfied, "because I like having a daddy who's happy." That evening, after Emma was asleep, James and Sarah sat on their porch swing, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "I got a call today," Sarah said quietly. "Oh?" "From Richard." James tensed. His father had made no attempt to contact him since the resignation, and James had assumed that silence would continue indefinitely. What did he want? "To apologize. To me specifically." Sarah took James's hand. He said he was wrong about my motivations and that watching you with Emma had taught him what he'd missed with you. James was quiet for a long moment. How do you feel about that? I think people can change. I think maybe he's realizing what really matters, just like you did. Are you suggesting I should call him? I'm suggesting that Emma might like to know her grandfather, and that forgiveness is usually more about freeing ourselves than absolving others. Through the window they could hear Emma talking to Sparkles in her sleep, probably narrating some wonderful dream about princesses and adventures. She wants to invite her whole class to her birthday party next month, Sarah said, changing the subject. All of them? Every single one. She says it's not a real party unless everyone can come. James smiled. That was his daughter, generous to her core, just like her mother. Then we'll have the biggest birthday party this neighborhood has ever seen. She also asked if we could have a wedding cake. James turned to look at Sarah. A wedding cake? She's been dropping hints for weeks. Apparently several kids at school have asked why Mommy and Daddy have different last names, if we're a real family. James felt his heart start racing. And what have you told her? That sometimes families come together in different ways, and love is more important than names or ceremonies. But, Sarah was quiet for a moment. But I've been thinking that maybe Emma has a point. Maybe we should make it official. James slipped off the porch swing, dropping to one knee beside it. Sarah's eyes widened. Sarah Mitchell, he said, his voice thick with emotion. 5 years ago, I was too scared to ask you this question. I let fear make my decisions, and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me. But I'm not scared anymore. He pulled out a small velvet box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Will you marry me? Will you make our family official? Will you give Emma the wedding cake she's been dreaming about? Sarah was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she whispered, yes, to all of it. As James slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma's voice drifted from her bedroom window. Yay! Now we can have the princess wedding. They looked up to see their daughter's face, pressed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. How long have you been awake? Sarah called. Just long enough to see Daddy propose. Can I be the flower girl? Can we have a purple cake? Can Princess Buttercup come to the wedding? James and Sarah looked at each other and burst into laughter. Come here, little eavesdropper, James called. Emma raced outside in her pajamas, throwing herself into their group hug. Is this what happily ever after feels like? She asked. James looked at his daughter, at his fiancée, at the life they'd built together from broken pieces and second chances. Yes, sweetheart, he said, this is exactly what happily ever after feels like. And as they sat together on the porch swing, 3 people who had found each other against all odds, James realized that the little girl who had called him that day, asking for a job for her mommy, had actually been offering him something much more valuable. She'd been offering him a family. She'd been offering him love. She'd been offering him a chance to become the man he was always meant to be. The best job he'd ever had wasn't running a billion-dollar company. It was being Emma's daddy, and that was a job he planned to keep for the rest of his life.